Our family room's kind of like a dungeon. But I wanted to show the installation of what might be the only 1-inch steer suspension fork that we picked up on Amazon. This might be the only suspension fork left on Earth, unless you find some old, maybe an old RockShox or something off of eBay. But as far as new goes, this is pretty much what I found to be the only game in town for a 1-inch steer tube threaded headset. Which on our old Bridgestone here, that's what it takes, is a 1-inch threaded headset. No exceptions. So we picked this up on Amazon. It was like 85 bucks. It's a RST Capa series. Pretty inexpensive. You're not going to go downhill racing with this thing or anything like that. This is pretty much just for cruising. It also does have disc brake mounts. It's a IS mount, which is pretty nice. I think that's going to work out well for us. And this is replacing a very, very old threaded 1-inch RockShox that was a dinosaur when I bought it, all the way back in like, geez, I don't know, must have been 1997 or 98 or so. So, with this Capa fork, it when it comes from Amazon, it has like a 200 millimeter steer tube, which is like way up here. And the threads were 50 millimeters worth of threads. Obviously, that wouldn't work at all for this Bridgestone head tube. So I had to rethread this, 1.24 inch. I had to cut, well, I only had to cut 1 inch of threads, but I cut threads from when it was, before it was cut. So I had to cut 3 inches of threads. It took almost 3 hours just taking my time and going really slow. This is in its cut down state, ready to install. It's very difficult to see. Apologize for that. I had to manually cut a new lock ring groove. It's got a little bit of grease in it, so it might not look the most visually appealing, but when you're cutting threads on the steer tube and cutting a lock ring groove, you got to be really careful with this stuff because you don't want to make the steer tube fragile. That'd be kind of bad if that snapped off up there, but in theory the stem would keep it from falling apart, but you don't want to take no chances with that stuff anyways. So it's going back together with a new Origin 8 sealed 1-inch threaded headset. Absolutely beautiful parts for the price. I think it was $35. So that's going to be pretty awesome to see this all come together. I'm waiting right now on a wrench from Amazon to tension up the headset bearings. I need a skinny wrench to do it. I don't know what happened to my old skinny wrench, because we just don't work on threaded headsets very much anymore. Obviously took quite a bit of measuring, and you want to measure 8 times before you cut once, because if you mess up the steer tube, the fork is no good. All this stuff has got a little bit of grease film on it. Like I said, it's supposed to be sealed bearings, so I didn't have to do anything to the bearing. Here's the adjuster nut. This Origin 8 stuff looks like it's pretty decent parts for the dollars. I know it's not super high-end stuff. There's one of the sealed bearings that just fell down out of there. The lower sealed bearing just fits in the cup nicely. My threads turned out really, really good. Not too loose. Believe it or not, I cut those threads with a hardware store tap and a cheap tap handle that holds that big of a die. If you use really good cutting fluid, you can't use WD-40 or motor oil or anything like that. You got to use good cutting fluid. These threads need to be perfect. So yeah, once I get my wrench, we'll get this guy torqued up. You can see, well, maybe you can't see because of the crappy lighting. I'll bring you guys back up here with me. There's a groove in the tension nut for the lock ring, and he fits, I promise. Oh, I gotta find my groove. There we go. Drops right down in there. Once you set the tension on the bearings, we can lock it down with the jam nut. This jam nut's got a rubber seal built into it, which is kind of cool. Maybe help keep some of the crud out of there to keep the old stem from getting seized in the steer tube. But yeah, not having ridden it yet, I can't say high praise for this fork at this time. I suspect it'll do just fine for putting down the road. This bike pretty much just sees gravel and campground paths and roadways and things of that nature. We're not going racing with it, so that's where we're at. Once my wrench shows up from Amazon, which is one stop away, fancy little Amazon map, I'll get this set up, put the bars back on it, and we might have to take her for a quick test spin with no brakes and no shifter. Don't advise doing that, but do as I say, not as I do. If you guys have any questions on this fork in the future as we get some miles on it, just ask them. I'll try and put a link for the fork right off of Amazon. It's like I said, if you're trying to retrofit an old, this is vintage stuff. It's pretty much the only game in town that's left. Unless you find something used, I reckon. Hope this helps. Tune in for the rest of the build as it comes along.